from Providence College. I think for there, I keep calling her by her first name, and I don't usually like to say her last name and where she's from. And Jim Mezzanotte from ANI.
Hello.
And we're here to hopefully get you involved in a project that we've started to share some stories about Sakai users and their experiences. So this is going to be a pretty informal, try to get everybody involved session. We thought we'd just start by showing you the site and giving you an idea of what our process has been. And then we're going to allow most of the time for, hopefully, you all, and I think maybe we'll need to work with you, because we have some small numbers here, although quality, I'm sure, to actually maybe start some new stories. So, Jim, do you want to, well, let's do a little round robin here, and I'll let Jim talk for a minute.
Okay, sure. So just to reiterate too, so we're going to ask you to do some stuff in here. So that's the idea here. We're just going to, either on your computer or on a scratch pad that you have, an actual, get old school here with the notepad, but the idea is just to get a little farther along in generating a story that we can put up here. Maybe we should, yeah, let's.
So the idea was, we're using WordPress, and so the idea is, someone comes to you with a problem, and you need to help them solve it. So we're trying to collect stories from people where it can be either for a course or for an academic, for an administrative use. Someone comes to you and says, I need help, how am I going to do this? And you say, oh, did you know this Sakai tool, you set the permissions this way, you can kind of tweak it and get it to work. So that's some of the stuff that we're working on. In addition, we're collecting people who have an issue and they don't know how to fix it. And so hoping that the community could then come in and say, oh, well, we solved it using this method. So we have a couple of stories that are up there now. We do want people to put images in if possible, and be very clear about how they actually use a particular tool to solve the issue.
So maybe we can go for a couple of these too, that we can see where the basic idea is to just lay out the need, or whatever the goal is, whatever the problem, if you want to call it that, we can call it a problem, whatever the use case is, and then to just write a brief narrative, hopefully with a couple of screenshots, to say exactly what it is that you did. And I think in this case, Siobhan, you actually had two different ways to use the same tool. And we did set this up so that you could look for things by tool. You can post them, and you can select, I think we have some categories here for different tools that we've added, and also by the type. And again, the idea, I mean, here we're just trying to generate stories, but when you go to this site, we thought it might be good to generate some discussion, hopefully, to have scenarios as well. So if we go to here, we have, this is pretty cool, which is just some of the submission challenges that you might face for different cases in which what's getting passed back and forth is not your typical Word document or a PDF or something like that. So that's one thing here. And we'll look at this one here. It's another story. Yeah.
So again, the idea is, ideally, you tell a story about how somebody used Sakai. It doesn't have to be way out on the bleeding edge, and it doesn't even have to be a success story, right? It's basically, here's what we tried, and here's what happened. Here's how it worked. It doesn't necessarily have to be some great trick with a tool. It can just be, here's something that worked really well, or here's something we tried and it didn't work, and we learned this from it. And the idea is that we want to just build this repository of stories that people can search through and look at and learn from and share ideas. The other piece that Jim was just talking about, these scenarios, is another piece that we're not going to really get into farther today. But the idea is to post a scenario that you have of something that you want to do, and you're not quite sure how to do it. And then ideally people will respond and say, well, here's one way you could do it, or here's what we did. So it could be either something, a way that you think it could be done, or a way that you've actually done it. But today we're going to concentrate on the stories piece. Siobhan wrote a story. This is a story that I wrote. Harold, our friend here, submitted a story, and I think my friend Aurora, who has
she's not going to be able to make it.
She's not going to be able to.
She's going to be able. She's going to submit.
She's going to submit a story.
Submit it later.
So, do you want to pull up Harold's?
Sure. And I maybe to say one more thing too, just to kind of tie in this idea of hopefully we can see the usefulness or what we perceive as the usefulness. We called this session Beyond Help, and the idea was that usually users are trying to learn about Sakai by tutorials or the online help, which tend to not have a lot of context that they can hang their hats on. So that's the idea here, is that a lot of times it's much easier. Someone says, resources is a great, and the lesson builder, these two stories are perfect, where you go to lesson builder and it's just an empty canvas. You see a bunch of buttons and there's a bunch of ways to do things, but it can be really difficult to move forward with it if you don't have a sense of it's good to have examples. And somebody else says, oh, okay, now I get it. Someone else is using it this way, and I can do. And then it's easier to follow those help directions if you have some plan. So that's the idea here. Our latest one here.
So Harold submitted a story, and Jim put it up. We're sort of building this as it goes, right? And I had the suggestion that what Harold posted was a really neat idea, right? And he's actually had people who've used this, right, Harold?
And so what he did say that Sean here from Roger Williams.
I actually did. I did it.
He actually did
10 minutes after he posted it. I actually went in and did it.
Cool.
Cool. So this one is how to put a Twitter feed on your homepage of your course site.
So what Harold submitted was kind of, here's how, right? And he actually included some fairly advanced, fancy way to do it from an administrative point of view. And we said, well, let's change that a little bit, and let's take out the really high-end piece of the administrator and say, if you want to know how to do that, contact Harold. But put an example of a faculty member or a person who actually did this. So we do want this to be a story. We want this to be story-oriented. So a person who actually did something.
Are there any rules around stories?
So that's our next.
Have.
They're just the flip session, I think.
Okay, we'll just do. We put it up here for the flip session. So
we have it under draft story.
So here we go. It's pretty basic. I don't think it has to be the kind of very, we're talking about in the previous session about help. It has to be a strict adherence to consistency. But okay, yeah, sure. But at least for today, we can talk about this, and then we can talk about any kind of the style guide part of it too. What was the original goal, and was the challenge addressed? Because like we said, it could be that it didn't quite get there, and hopefully other people might be able to comment and help you with that. Course-related activities. What was the learning goal or the educational objective? In what way was using Sakai supposed to make it easier or more effective? If that is a question that can be answered, and what kind of a teaching and learning strategy was used? Did you have any problems, and if so, how did you resolve them? And how did users react? I think it's just one of the reasons that we were talking about. Harold submitted the story, and some of the suggestions that we had was, okay, here's the how-to part, but a great part of a user story would be, can you show an example? Like how was it being used? What was the end result of this from a student's perspective? And would you recommend this strategy to others, and why or why not? So these are just suggestions for scaffolding for things that you can do to create a story. It doesn't necessarily, you don't have to do these, but that's the idea.
So again, it's a story. It's not so much the how-to, although the how-to can be part of it. And the idea is that when people come, they'll see this is what somebody's actually done. And maybe they'll get an idea for something they didn't know about. Maybe they'll get an idea for how to do something they want to do that they already had an idea about. So it's going to, we hope it will fill multiple purposes. We also have a style picture.
Yeah, and so this is, we're talking about like style, things for style. And again, this is not a strict adherence, but informal, about 500 words. And again, the idea is to avoid jargon if it's possible, because it is kind of more geared towards faculty and students and the end user experience. One thing that might be a little bit dicey, and has always been the case, is you have to worry about the privacy issue. If you're going to take a screenshot, you're going to have to consider that. If it's you're going to show some nifty way to use a discussion forum or something, I think those are the sorts of things that have always been hard, right? Because the minute you're trying to actually show student interaction, it can become difficult because you can't show student names. So that's something to keep in mind. Yeah, resources and whatever you want to do for other things to consider and linking, and then just if you wanted to do a short video, that would be fantastic. But again, I think the idea here is just to keep the bar low so that we can just start generating some content and get some stories in here.
So I purposely put a sort of an abstract image there because some people are going to have a hard time coming up with a photograph, right? You want to put a photograph. We want to make it attractive, right? So I purposely put that there as just an example of a way to make something colorful. So maybe you come up with a screenshot to help illustrate what you did, but maybe also just put an image that's sort of suggested by what you did. You go into Flickr and you put in discussion and you get this neat image of people talking, and that's part of your story. Or maybe we help you do that. And we're all willing to sort of help people edit these things.
And by the way, all of this is on the site, on the Sakai user site, so it's always there to yeah, go ahead.
You just remind me when I read a journal article or something on the newspaper, think about how the journalists write their stories. So they probably interview somebody this person just experienced it themselves. So I tell what I experienced or I tell what I heard. And you probably want to tell the person who is actually in the story about it. So for example, if I want to write what I did with a faculty member, right? So I probably write it, but if the faculty is interested, we probably write together.
Sure.
See what we did together.
Fantastic. Luis and I were just talking, and one of the things you might struggle with is actually getting some information or feedback from faculty. So I think that's that. I don't know. I think it's not always easy, but that's one way to go.
And by the way, that's not abstract picture. That's Chinese.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's their style, their characters, but
there are 5 characters,
stylized.
and it's written on there.
Well, there you go. So
Hopefully it says something.
It says something really nice.
We planned to talk very little at the beginning, and what we want is to get you going. Did you want to?
So what we were thinking now is just to have you either work by yourself or work in pairs or a group, ideally, and just think about 1 or 2 situations on your campus where you have done something interesting using Sakai. Just kind of jot down some notes.
Just think quietly first.
Yeah. We want you to have some time, and then share some of the ideas that you have, and hopefully that can then generate some stories that we can eventually put on the blog.
So what we were actually thinking was, just think by yourself for a minute or 2, right? Or maybe you missed that part.
No, okay. I had to talk out, so I have to talk things out.
So we were just thinking to have people think first, and then we would share a couple of ideas, and then get you into groups. And how many of you are actually faculty who teach? 1. Okay. How many of you work pretty regularly with faculty who teach? There we go. So what the idea was, we wanted to make sure that people had some kind of context here, and I think we'll be okay in that regard. So, should we start by why don't you we'd just like you to take a couple of minutes and maybe jot down an idea, maybe mentally jot down an idea, and then we'll share a couple, and then we'll get you in groups. Is that good?
Okay. This is the part where we ask you to do something.
So think.
So it could be just something we want to do, but.
Yeah, you could even, I think maybe we could even start with like, if you want to start, I'm thinking this makes it even quicker and easier is if you want to think of a particular goal, if there's some, especially I think we have a lot of people here who have support for faculty, right? So certainly you've been asked before that, I need to do X, Y, and Z. So the first thing you could do is just jot down like what are some of those interesting questions you've got for goals that you have, and just think of a couple of those, and we can just start with those.
Ideally, you have a story.
Well, yes, ideally.
We don't want to get too far.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah.
And it could be a vague story to start with.
Yeah.
How about if you have a story of a faculty member calls you every day asking you pretty much the same question you asked you the day before?
We'll put it up here. Then you
Okay.
can just send them here. That's part of the reason for this.
I know the scene.
Yeah.
I had to add
Good luck. That's you.
although I process as an extrovert.
We're gonna put you in groups anyway. So this is the
Go
only-
reverse introvert.
All right. All right. I can sense that this group likes to actually talk rather than think and write. So if I'm not mistaken. So an idea that one of you has about a story that they situation. Yes. And maybe you can say who you are.
Here's my story.
I've seen that before too.
We had the same issue come up this semester at our university, so I'm looking into psychology.
So I actually wrote this in a agile thing. So the beginning of my story is I'm a faculty member and want to create open and accessible resources for the faculty because I want my students to have common.
Cool. So the story could be how that went, creating
Right,
that like a repository of resources for like sections of a course, for example, or something like that.
Yeah, so I mean, we actually developed a solution.
Cool.
So open and available sounds great, but when you get into the context of it, it just had to be open and available to folks in their department. So what they did was created a W site, the faculty, and put it in, and then they were able to import the site as much as they wanted into their regular course there.
Excellent story,
And so-
premise.
And also,
Love
just to kind of like emphasize what we're talking about here, you could talk about this in terms of like how to do X, Y, and Z in the resources tool, and that doesn't help a lot of people because what they need to hear is, I want my course materials to be open and accessible. I want my
Right.
course to be open and accessible because that's the story to pick.
Right. And I think part of what I'm thinking about, and I think each of us have a little bit different conception. Part of what I'm thinking is this site fills that need of telling the stories. There's other places where you can go for the hacks. There's other places where you can go for the how-tos. This place is meant to be sort of, here's an idea, here's a way that we've used it, right? We can go somewhere else to go find the help system. We can go to our local, tutorial repository for how to do thing X. But a particular example of a need and how we filled it, that's kind of what we're most interested in.
Actually, I don't know that to take one step further. One issue we're going to get to without Sakai for 3 years, we're hosted by Sakai. We're at 75% for this usage, our allocated this space. A problem, the repository is good, and this would be the repository, whether it's for a group or whether it's for an individual faculty. The question is, rather than copying, and I think what's killing us on our disk space is they keep it from semester to semester to semester. You got 8 copies of the same, documents or videos. It's eating up all of this space. To take the step further, is there a way, how can they just put links in their courses that point to that repository?
Right.
Yeah.
So,
We did that.
So then, within the story, what might be my, our administrator says that we're not supposed to keep on uploading this stuff into the course site.
Right.
So
and
one,
it's over here, and how the heck am I supposed to get my students to it?
so one story that we've had was we had people create a project site for those persistent resources that went with their course site, right? And so the project site didn't go away because it wasn't bound by semesters, and that's where they put all the stuff. So it's another way to think of what you guys did.
There's another way to do it.
So,
Do, right? And again, I have a working story that was written about space, and my students also are contributing to our site. Set of students who experience that and then.
Oh, that's great. Okay.
So-
You
Yeah.
can just keep on coming across there.
cool.
Okay.
So other story ideas, rather than this is a great one.
So what I like about this is that you can also just use my resources to have the person link to it that way. So then this would become a conversation that we have
Right.
through the blog, because one, how long do your courses live? Have you ever gotten rid of old courses? That would be one question, because, at my institution, of course, but it lived for 2 years in a different way. When we first got Sakai, we worked very hard with dealing with the folks who we knew reused content over and over and over, to initially have them have one place and just link instead of copying. Because once they start getting into that mode, it's really hard to break. So then that could be something that someone who's just, adopted Sakai would be like, oh, wow, these are things I hadn't even thought about.
So we're hoping that the site will generate some of this kind of online discussion. All right, another idea, something that doesn't have to do with the same.
Okay. I've been helping a faculty developing a course called negotiation. Basically, he taught this in the classroom many years. So basically 4 teams, and they negotiate in the classroom. So each week there is a case. There are 4 teams. For example, A and B are negotiating. C and D are shadowing them. So they watch how they discuss and how they negotiate. So they happen in the classroom. So he came to me saying, I need to do this online. So we just create forums and figure out the settings. So when you create a forum, usually the settings we use are, create a forum, create a topic, and just put a student there, go talk. We rarely just look at the settings, so what exactly may facilitate the discussion. So for this particular case, there are 4 teams, right? So we create several different topics. So for example, one room is a public discussion. The other one is a private. So for example, only for team A. But you remember that one team is supposed to shadow them, right? So the team A is the contributor. Team C is the reviewer. So that's how we use the different roles.
So cool.
That's a
Cool.
really great idea.
So there's another idea. How about a third idea?
Yeah.
So right now we're rather than sharing the entire story, what about some ideas? And maybe not a finished one.
An unfinished one.
Awesome.
I work in the registrar's office at my college, and I work with Siobhan and Adam here right now. But I'm very interested in using Sakai for administrative processes. And so all of our faculty need to complete a classroom preferences form, basically saying, what kind of classroom space they would like to use for the upcoming semester. And so I brought this idea to Siobhan, but we've not yet quite figured out how we would accomplish it. So I'm wondering if any of you have done anything similar at your own institution.
So let's hold that thought. That could be a scenario, right? There's a scenario, right? So other ideas, and we can come back, but that could also just be posted as a scenario. So what Yvonne described was, here's something that I want to do, and we're pretty sure we could do this in Sakai. Have any of you ever done this, or how could we do it? And so just premises, basically. Doesn't have to be something that you can describe in detail. Better, in fact.
We had an organization that one of our campuses that wanted to be able to post project information. We're trying to figure out how to do that. And what they ended up doing was clogs.
Which?
Clogs.
Is that even there?
We don't call it that.
Yeah, that's blogs. Blogs is one that's not there.
Oh.
Clog is collaborative blog. That's the latest and greatest blog tool.
Basically use it just for that. Work quite well.
Well, there you go.
So was there just one entry for each project? Was that the idea behind it? And then everyone would just contribute one, so you could just go to because it lists. The good thing about the cloud tool is that it lists posts on that first page, which the old blogs didn't do. So was that the idea that you really didn't even need to do anything at all? You can just go to the tool and you've already got all these.
There you go. So Dina, I know you got something in your head. I know it. You're just waiting to share it.
More general, this is a question we get asked, and we have lots of answers for it, but as an instructor, how do I get students to contribute to my course? I want them to contribute and have some ownership over that. I think that's an interesting story, because I think instructors don't often know how to best manage that. Beyond forms, they usually get forms, but.
So here's a suggestion. You probably have some good answers to that question. So what I would say is you start a story by saying, here's a question I often get asked as a resource person, and here are 2 or 3 simple answers, and based on people, you've actually helped people do these things. So I mean, right away I think of the student pages in the lessons tool, for example, is one way, and there's other ways, right? So that's the nub of a great story right there. Emily, come on, you got to have something back there. You can just pass. It's okay too.
No, I I'm a new in tax, so maybe for the teacher, they want to correct all the words and they want to make audio at the same time. So I know that we can add a document when you correct, but I don't know if in a word we can add like a little something.
Okay, so that could be a scenario. Here's something that we ought to be able to do. How can we do it? So one answer might be, I don't know if you can save a Word, an audio annotated Word document as an attachment, and if that would work. So, you know, somebody might say, well, here's one way you could do it. Someone else might say, well, in Sakai 10, you have this great little, you know, recording tool, and we did that, or whatever. So we've got a couple of scenarios and a couple of stories. Does it start to make a little more sense here? We're not looking for literary 2,000-word masterpieces, right? So get the point across, share the story. It's intended to be low threshold, right? And to build a nice repository. And the more we have, ideally, the more people say, oh, this is good, I want to put my story in here. Or, oh, I see there's 4 or 5 different kinds of stories. Maybe it's okay for me to write one too.
So next phase?
So the next phase was we were hoping that people could get together and actually start saying specifically, well, here's a story I'd like to write. You know, give me some ideas of what I could put in there. Should we ask the group? Does that sound? I mean, would you? How many of you are comfortable with that idea at this point? Actually, starting to draft a real story. I see 3 or 4 or 5 hands. How many of you would prefer to continue doing what we're doing right now and talk about stories and share stories and scenarios? Yes,
I
Dina.
have a third
The
suggestion.
third way.
Could we work on crafting a story as an entire group or a scenario?
Sure.
Sure.
That's just.
We did.
Could be a little
Why didn't
tricky.
we, why didn't we think of that? Yeah. We thought it out, we just didn't want to serve.
We waited for Dina to
We gave
get
that a
it.
lot, we thought it out right away, and we gave it a lot of thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we could just make a little Buddha doc here.
Oh, we would just do a draft right in the box.
Just do that. Or just do it right, oh, yeah. Yeah, right, of course.
Just know you're welcome.
Go ahead.
So
It should just be-
related, but not related. So scenarios are ideas that do not have a solution.
Yeah, that's the idea.
So has there been thought around, so if a scenario states a scenario for the past 6 months or a year, would there be any connection to developers' communities and then turn that scenario into Jira and then make it become an actionable item?
That's a good idea. I mean, I think what would help me, I think you're on the, well, personally, I know let others respond to this too, but I think you're on the right track in terms of what definitions would you want for a scenario, right? Attributes for a scenario that would make you want to, push it onto a developer. Because, I mean, hopefully the other thing too, always with developers is they want to know how many other people are having. So one thing we could do is like either having a certain amount of comments or the voting, because that's what goes on with Jira's, and that's how I think a lot of times in the Sakai community, that's how the development goes, is how many people, because I think developers are always concerned that something might seem like a good idea, but in the big picture it ends up being an edge case, and they don't want, they're thinking it's, well, yeah, that's a great idea, but you're the only person who wants this.
In our institution, we use a voting system by one of our faculty advising groups called Super Echo. And so someone submits an idea and it's information place to posting a comment on the idea or the vote. And then we'll go through that system, and I guess an idea will clearly depending on how many votes it has, we then look at it and think, can we develop this, can we grow this into an actual item, and then develop it.
Yeah, so this blog lives in ANI's storage space, and it's their own installation of WordPress. So there are plugins that could add functionality like that. Sure. My concern is that we don't want the project to become too many things, right? But I think a simple way to do that would be to say, here's something that's an obvious need that the system doesn't provide. Can we just forward this item on? So it could go in any direction.
I think the other good thing too is if this did become a good resource for comments and other resources, is that what you would eventually see for a scenario that never got a solution is you'd see the Jira link, right? Because then somebody else comes along and says, I've got this, hey, I've got the same problem, and there's the link to the Jira because it's already been put into the system, and that would also be tremendously helpful because that's another thing I've noticed that can be very frustrating, I think, for folks, is that even if you have some experience going into the community Jira, it's tough to know what issues already exist, especially for enhancement requests. It can be really hard to know if you're asking something new, if it's been asked before, if it's been shelved, if it's been, just what the status of it is. Which I spend a lot of time doing that myself, and it can be difficult sometimes to know exactly where certain requests reside and the status of them. So
how do you do that? Do you just search?
Our process here is not that we make you go into WordPress and start writing a story. So our process is that if you have a story idea, you can send it to us. I think we have Jim's name as the contact. Yeah. Send it to Jim. We might put a draft in here and talk about it, like with Harold's, and get some feedback and make some suggestions as to how could this maybe fit better with what we're looking to do. But maybe we can, following Dina's suggestion, I can show you what we'd like to do eventually is if your story goes in, we'll add you. So we added Harold as a contributor to the blog so that when his article comes up, it's got his name and not Jim's or mine or Siobhan's. It's very easy to do, and you don't even have to actually become a member of the blog. We'll put your name in there so it looks like you are. And so it makes you the author. But you can also, if you're comfortable with WordPress, you can also come in and be editing. So why don't we take? I'm sorry, I never got your name.
Oh, Francesca.
Francesca. Shall we try Francesca's story? So, I mean, what we asked people to do was start. Well, what was the goal? What was the need, or if it's a teaching situation, the learning goal?
So the goal is to create open and accessible course resources used by a group of faculty within the same department. So that students would have a common learning experience.
I don't know if you all do this, but I switch it back and forth between a tablet, a touch screen tablet, and a laptop, and I'm constantly pointing at this to try to touch the laptop screen. Doesn't work. Something like that. Can everybody read that?
Yeah, you need to change the CW to.
Oh, a suit of resources.
There you go.
So the initial idea was, how would that happen? So how did you decide to do it?
We created a dummy course site and enrolled all the architectural faculties in that site, and then help them create question tools, organize the resources folder, and then since they were all a member of the site, we could pull those
Did they have course set or project?
No, so that's a good question. So we had to make it a course site because we do have things like simply question pools and a project site. Commissioning is a little complicated, and we weren't sure how that would copy over from project to course. We said, let's just make it.
Yeah. And did you make a folder for each one of the faculty in the resources?
No, I mean, it wasn't that structured. We just kind of gave them the means to do it, and then we said, have at it. Whatever makes sense to your department. This was a language department, so much of what they were doing I didn't understand anyway. I didn't know what they were saying.
But it's faculty within one, they all work together.
So yes and no. So this course runs concurrently between campus and New York and then campus Florence.
There's also something
so
about the
their
context of
faculty
it, right?
are collaborating asynchronously across multiple time zones.
Right, so that's, there we go.
So it was really important for the distance factor, the fact that they could have, Tuesday. It was really important for technology.
Thanks, Francesca, because I was wondering how we could get an entire department together that would be willing to share resources, or to build a course that's taught by multiple instructors where they agree to use the same resources. I think that's definitely something that needs to be.
And they actually came to us at the request, so this is a common practice.
It's languages people understand how they normally are, so they love to share. It's great.
This may be an outside of that, but all the content that was created, whose copyright was it under?
Yeah, so most of the content that actually went into the site were question banks for assessments. In terms of, we usually have very good discussions with our faculty that come in to work with us. We talk about Creative Commons. We talk about fairness in general and how it applies to your site. We hope that they're doing the right thing each semester, but we can't really use it. So I don't think that they're sharing anything that's sort of proprietary, or I didn't see any full albums uploaded to the site.
I got a question. Did you guys use the question pool in the test and quizzes?
Yeah.
Okay, so does it apply to your scenario?
Because that's what the content
Yeah,
is.
they were able to share. You could share.
Yeah,
already
so
there.
that's why
It's
I'm
part of
saying,
context.
one question pool, everybody can
No,
use.
let's say
Yeah,
that's what's in
yeah.
the
They
context.
all pulled
Say
from the
that.
same. They would have banks like I was.
I mean, I've dealt with this because I've had some people leave, but when a person leaves, the question pool is tied to their account and not to. Have you run into that yet?
That's part of it.
Transferring the question pool over to the new person. But the owner is still the person who left, right?
I think it's coming that you can transfer ownership.
So
I think
Is it more than
because
easily?
no, I think we requested it. I think Weston requested that, but then we got into it. We used that heavily when we migrated from WebCT, and our consultant built question pools to kind of get our quiz questions all came in one quiz, and they copied the question pool, and then they shared that with the instructor. But our consultants are students, so they graduate and they leave, and then we're like, well, who owns this question pool now? These are just orphaned everywhere. So I believe that's coming in a near release that you'll be able to change ownership of the question pool. We've rolled that out, and we did that.
It's not a problem.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe it concerns the policies of online materials. For example, at Marist, I'm not sure if it's a entire school policy, but I think in one department, they're saying that if you create materials for purely online courses, the material belongs to the department.
Maybe the department.
No, that's just fully online.
Yeah, that's a fully online course.
Yeah, I think fully online courses, the trend that I've been seeing for different institutions that fully online courses seem to have different copyright attributes tied to why I don't know.
Yeah, it's really gray area.
Teach Act.
We have a license.
So I need to interrupt for a second because it's cool that everybody's into the specifics of this story, but what we're after is to try to get people to understand the idea of how we would draft the story. So we've only got a few minutes. So we've come up with goals, the context, the strategy, the challenges. We could talk about results. We could talk about recommendation. What kind of image would you think you would put with this, or is there a video idea that you would put with this?
Screenshot of some kind.
You know, a screen capture, a screencast of how people were importing stuff. So what if you want to just put some image that wasn't direct? What kind of a sort of an evocative image could you put with this? People sharing something. You might have like a little map of the two sites or something like that with a map showing how the sites were distant.
Just how the whole flow is going to work.
Right. Does this start to make sense? So this is kind of an outline. You might start with the context and go to the goals, right? So this is just the beginning of a story, and it doesn't have to be more complicated than this, right? And we're looking for about 500 words, give or take a little bit. We're not looking for super high level, journalistic writing, although we want it to be correct and all of that. But it doesn't have to be lots of jargon or formal, literary, academic journalese.
And then I think one of the bigger things too would be how was it? That's one of the things we consider is how was it received, right? How was it?
Did it help?
Yeah.
What was the reaction? So, were there any snags, or was there anything about it that you had to tweak that originally?
We had to make a special knowledge base article around how to re-edit some of the images if you copy the question bank. Some students, this is it. So in the source site, the resources folder where those images are stored, you have to change the permissions to say make this folder publicly viewable. Right. So that as you copy the site, the student permissions that are involved in the site, you can still look back to the site.
So what I would ask is that Francesca contact Jim if you'd like to follow up.
Yeah.
And Jim can either make you the author of this article in WordPress, and you can work with him or one of us to kind of let's see how it goes. And then the rest of you, I'd really encourage you yourselves, find a faculty member that you worked with, right, or an administrative type person that you worked with. We did a thing with our honor code orientation, for example. It wasn't a typical teaching and learning situation, but we worked up an honor code system within Sakai, so the students sort of do a little quiz on the honor code to say they know what it's about. So there are plenty of uses outside of traditional teaching and learning. So any of those, ideally, I think that the best thing would be for an IT type to sort of work with a faculty or a user and come up with a story. So we'd really like to encourage you to take part in this. The more stories we have, the more useful it's going to be, and hopefully it'll generate some interest. And I think we all really hope that you will take part.
Just quick, this last thing, so we can't have it today. But
Submit.
we did these two. So
Submit. Right, not submit.
Yeah, two stuff.
Yeah. Question?
How do you plan on getting the word out that this exists?
Well, how do we get the word out? We're going to contact people who can put it in front of people, right? So Jim sent it out to his users. We all have outlets for sharing this kind of stuff.
I think it's tough. I can just keep, my plan is to keep on sending it out to the Sakai list, but it's like anything like this. To my mind, that's one of the reasons we wanted to do this session, is that the easier part is almost getting the word out and having people say, yeah, that's a good idea, yeah, that sounds great. The hard thing is actually submitting something, putting something together and submitting it, which is why we wanted to just try and get the ball rolling a little bit to say it's not really that, it doesn't have to be that big of a bar.
I think the hard part is starting. The hard part is not writing the story. Once you get started, it's pretty easy, and particularly with help. The hard part is actually sitting down and saying, I'm going to write a story, and then it'll probably flow. We're not asking for a lot of detailed writing. So I think you'll find it's not that hard if you start to do it.
Yeah, I would say, like, I was the one that they dragged kicking and screaming into this, and when I finally sat down and did it, I already had the handouts ready that I hand out to students. So it just took me going in, taking a couple of screenshots, and uploading my handouts, and then submitting it. So I just did it on a Friday afternoon when it's quiet in the office. I wanted to give back, so
we had to threaten her with not getting a good grade on the participation, but
we need to
on that, but it
only
works.
10% of class.
Yeah, that's right.
So we need to stop the ramble fest that we started here. And thank you all for participating.
Thank you.
I hope that this will turn into something you find useful, and please join the project. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. I usually don't set it up, so.
Wait, it was down.